So, the Prime Minister has set out her latest vision of Brexit. And today, the British and European negotiators said there had been some progress. Theresa May says we need a Brexit transition period lasting around 2 years, during which nothing much changes. We remain in the single market, business carries on as before. Also remaining, 4 years after people voted to leave, remember, will be our financial payments into the EU, something many here in Wakefield may be unhappy about. At the end of it all, according to Mrs May, the UK will leave the customs union and the single market, but will have sought a new free trade deal with the EU. Is it achievable? Is it the best Brexit for Britain? Here tonight, in the Hepworth Gallery, we have a room full of people who all voted to leave, politicians and voters, to debate whether Brexit is on track or being messed up or even betrayed. Next week, the Remainers will debate their strategy in Bath, and you can follow both these debates on Twitter using the hashtag BrexitReality and on YouTube, where we'll carry on after the news until 8 p.m. So to kick us off, the Conservative MEP, Dan Hannan, tells us why he thinks Brexit is heading for success.
Most things that are worth doing involve some transitional cost. I think we all know that. You move house. However much nicer the new place is than the old one, the move itself is still a bit of a pain. But 10 years from now, when we're living in a democratic, prosperous, free and global Britain, the only question we're going to ask is why we didn't leave earlier. Un morceau de pâté en croûte, s'il vous plaît. C'est très gentil. Merci bien. Et bonne journée. Britain has an interest in the success and stability of the EU 27. So I think we all agree that we're going to pay what's due. And obviously, if we stay part of programmes on education or research, we're going to pay our share of the bill. But you don't pay just to trade with another country, right? Trade is not an act of generosity, an act of kindness. In fact, every non-EU country in Europe, with the sole exception of Belarus, has free trade with the EU. It's possible to have a common market without a common government. (52-48) is a narrow result. It's not a mandate to sever all our links with the EU. It's a mandate for a phased, gradual recovery of power. Think of Canada's relationship with the United States. Canada also has a political union on its doorstep. It's not part of that federation, but it has the closest political, economic, intelligence and military ties compatible with being an independent country. Britain should likewise aim to be the leader of all of those countries that want friendship and trade with the EU rather than political assimilation. If you look at the official stated positions, the two sides are a lot closer than the headlines might suggest. Britain and the EU agree that there shouldn't be a hard border in Ireland. They agree that we should guarantee the rights of EU nationals who have already settled in the UK and of Brits in the rest of the EU. They agree on having frictionless customs. They agree on having not just a trade relationship, but continuing cooperation in intelligence, security and policing. And they agree that there'll need to be some kind of interim arrangement, some kind of bridging measures, so as to provide stability for businesses on both sides. This is what Theresa May means when she talks about a deep and special partnership between Britain and the EU. We should aim to be the EU's best friend and closest ally.
And Daniel Hannan is with us here live tonight, as is a distinguished audience and panel, and I'll introduce them as we go along, otherwise we might be here all night. Patrick O'Flynn, you're a UKIP MEP. How do you think it's going? Are you happy with the transitional period?
I agree with Dan that I think we'll get there in the end, but let me throw another view out, Christian, which is a view that many Brexit voters are saying to me. They're losing faith. They think all we've had is dither and delay. David Cameron said if Leave prevailed, that Article 50 would be triggered straight away. It wasn't. Theresa May took 8 months as Prime Minister to trigger it, and Article 50 itself is in turn a delay. And now we find out there's this implementation period, which is really a non-implementation period, sort of Orwellian language here, because nothing much will change as you set out. And there is no deadline date of that implementation period. And I read it's reported now that people like Amber Rudd and Philip Hammond are trying to drag the 2 years to 3 years so it rolls into the next general election, and the manifesto pledges then can supersede any commitments being given. So the gloomy reading would be that it's not Project Fear, it's Project Doom, and it's like one of those Samuel Beckett plays where nothing actually happens and everyone loses the will to live.
And do you fear that that's actually what's going to happen, that they won't do it?
Well, I think there are people around the cabinet table who would like us to end up at least in a permanent, indefinite Norway-style arrangement, which they derided as fax democracy during the referendum. And I think Theresa May should insist that the Hammonds and the Rudds actually pop up and say there will be no dragging out of this non-implementation
Well, you got the beginning of a round of applause there. I mean, who was it? Yes, sir.
Yeah.
On the front row.
This whole thing is an embarrassment. It's a tragedy. Mrs May is a lovely lady, but she doesn't have the testosterone to push this thing through. I mean, what on earth are they going to do if we leave tomorrow morning?
Isn't that really what it's about?
If we leave tomorrow morning, what are they going to do? Are they going to invade us from Germany or France and enforce the thing? It's ridiculous. For a proud nation like Britain, we are a shambles at this.
Daniel Hannan.
Well, during the campaign, Patrick and I and all of us in Vote Leave made the argument that the EU wasn't just an association of nations, that the whole problem with it was that it got into our domestic affairs and regulated our internal policy. And because we've had 45 years now of even completely national issues being determined by Brussels, we're very intertwined. And that's why it's just not practical to say all of this is going to come to an end, at midnight on Tuesday. You've got to have time to put alternative arrangements in place so that we can cooperate not as an EU province but as an independent country. And I think, do you know what? I mean, I've been making this campaign for most of my adult life. 45 years we've been not a fully independent country. Surely the timing is less important now than the result. Than getting a deal that is in our interest and everybody else.
You're shaking your head.
It's rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. This is a proud and an independent country. We're Britain. We don't need to kowtow to these people. Just walk away tomorrow morning and say, that's it, we're off.
Hold on, let's get the gentleman.
OK, first of all...
Just tell us who you are, by the way.
I'm from Manchester. I've come up actually for the debate today. Was invited, thank you. I voted to leave. But I think at the time I was voting with the columns of the Daily Mail and the sort of the UKIP, Nigel's enthusiasm. Now I'm taking time to really, really look at things here, Daniel. And I'm concerned that we are trying to take a sword to a Gordian knot. We need to unravel this slowly and carefully and with some attention to detail.
So you like the transitional period?
I do. And one question I've got here. There must be 40 to 50,000 laws that have been made that we are bound to. If I just divided that over 24 months, we're talking about doing thousands of laws every single month. I don't believe that anybody can debate through that. I want to see the government give me a programme to say that this month to this month it's on science, from this month to this month it's on Ireland, and I'm very worried about the border, etc. And make that public so we know what we're getting.
Let me just bring in the lady behind you on the second row.
Hi. I'm very concerned about the transition period and what happens if the EU fetching legislation during that period of time? Are we bound to that afterwards? It seems a very grey area to me. And I'm also concerned that it can be done a lot quicker.
You'd like them to get on with it?
I'm also concerned about the free movement, where people can still come and look for work during this transition period. I would like it that only people that are along the interview process are allowed in from 2019. And that's what I think should happen.
Yes, the gentleman just along from you.
I agree with what the gentleman on the front there has said. We've been in the EU for 45 years, and to actually expect us to be able to leave overnight is very simplistic. And I think we need a transition period because it's much more important to get this right than to do it in a hurried rush.
Okay.
And consequently, I think an implementation period is necessary.
Let me bring in John Mann, who, on our panel, Labour MP. What do you think of the transitional period? Is it needed?
Well, I think Theresa May's, she said strong and stable, but whatever we think in this country, everyone else across the world is seen as significantly weaker than when she rushed into the election. That's why it's been delayed in the real world, is because everyone can see she's a weak leader, and she caused that herself. And so she's rather cornered herself. But we need to be in a position where I've got people in my area who moved to Spain, former miners, and they want to make sure if they want to keep living in Spain that they can. And so that's going to need properly negotiating. But more importantly, if we've got companies exporting to Europe, we want to make sure we can get those goods into France and into Germany without someone trying to stop us at the borders. So,
but do you see this is going to take 4 years? I mean, I'm not quite clear on what you think on the time.
There's no reason why it should take 4 years. But Theresa May is so weak now that the European Union, they're putting ladders there, because if you think about it politically, that's a year from when the election has to be. Might be before, but it has to be a year after. And if I'm in there thinking, from the European Union in the middle of it, well, hang on a minute, we spin it out for 4 years and it's just before an election. Well, perhaps there'll be a change of government. What will happen then? And that's part of
But that will scare people into voting Conservative again, you mean?
Well, I'm not going to do that because Jeremy's more pro-Leave than Theresa May. So, ironically, it might do the opposite. But in terms of their strategy and timescale, and I think really we've got to speed up some of this. And the key date for me, those European elections when some of these MEPs won't be being paid their salaries anymore. That's a pretty key. That's a pretty key date for me. And I think a lot of the stuff ought to be signed, sealed, and delivered by then. And there's some of it'll take a long time because some of it you want to change the rules on the size of rail clips to go on a railway line. Frankly, if that takes 20 years, that don't worry me. That minutiae. The big stuff though needs to be done quicker than 4 years.
Well, the other thing we're going to be doing for 4 years is paying in, which has now become very clear. So how do you feel about continuing to pay in? Nick Stansby, you're an accountant, aren't you?
I am, yes.
What do you think about paying in?
I don't think we should be paying at all. We shouldn't pay one bit because there is no guarantee that we will get the rebate that Margaret Thatcher negotiated many years ago once we've paid that money in. So that could be lost money. I think we need a starting point. We need a clear starting point. We need to say, look, this is what we're doing. We're not going to pay. We'll agree with the judicial system, but it's all very airy-fairy and not really thought through. I think Theresa May's had enough time to plan and have a strong, firm starting point. And we're not getting any of this. Business needs a strong, firm starting point.
Wasn't this money all going to be available to spend quicker than this?
It will.
350 million a week and all of that?
Sure. But look, first of all, we have an interest in the success and prosperity of our neighbours because prosperous neighbours make good customers, right? We don't want to leave in a way that causes a collapse in Europe. Only in the fantasies of Remainers were people voting Leave because they hated Europe, right? We were voting Leave because we had a vision of a prosperous and free Britain.
But I don't remember you during the campaign saying, if you vote Leave, you'll continue paying for 4 years, there'll still be freedom of movement for 4 years, nothing will change.
While we're still members, of course, we're using the facilities, of course we pay our subs then. Once we leave, obviously, that money will... we may choose to remain part of some programmes as an associate member, the way that the Canadians do, or the Swiss, or the Israelis, or whatever. Obviously, we'll pay for that. But the big-ticket items that we're paying now, agriculture, regional aid, foreign aid, all of that is going to come to an end. And yes, we will get the money back.
Let me bring in Lynn May. Now, you're from Pulse 88 Community Radio.
I am, yeah.
And you voted Brexit.
I did.
Like everybody else here in the room.
did.
What do you think about this idea of paying in?
I want to touch on a point that the gentleman said at the front, and I think, like much of the country, that we did actually vote to leave based on many headlines. And I know that many people say that, immigration shouldn't be looked at, but if that's the point that was driven home to us, and we can relate to that as people, because it affects our infrastructure, it affects, our NHS, which was another headline, it affects specifically housing, which I work in. However, certain questions keep on arising, and that's why I would say, like Daniel said, we've been a part of the EU for 45 years, and it's not going to take, you know, 1 or 2 days or even a month. However, I don't think that we should drag our feet for the simple fact it's something that the country did vote for. And also, I'd like to make a point in terms of, I know many people did say that this can be seen to be racism, and there's many things that I believe why it's being dragged for so long, because there's questions of another referendum, which I strongly disagree with, because we don't do that with general elections. If the people vote to leave, we need to leave. Yeah. However...
Sorry, Chris, I just want to quickly talk back on that. I'm not for referendums, just to get the result we want. I voted to leave. Mm. But I want to know, and no one's telling me here, how 40, 50,000 laws are completely eradicated, whether they are the right ones or the wrong ones, Daniel, in 24 months. I don't care what... What's the team?
They won't be.
Right, okay.
They won't be.
So
they're going to be rolled over
4 to 5 years in this negotiation. Who is behind the team?
Oh, no.
Who is... Are there 10,000 people working on this at the moment? Is there 1,000 people working on it? Who is the team actually doing our negotiations? Because Mr Davis is not giving me confidence.
Let him answer that.
Brexit is going to be a process, not an event, right? We should be honest. The day we leave is going to look very like the day before, because all of those regulations will still be in force. That's the day that we can start to diverge. That's the day that we can start to pursue a different trajectory towards a more global future, towards a more deregulated future, towards a more democratic future. But it's going to be a gradual divergence.
That message out that, please, we can't rush this negotiation. We need to be extraordinarily careful.
I think we've heard that from you. Let me bring in a couple of other people.
I disagree with that, because actually the link between a transitional period and talking about the money putting in, is it fair to say for 45 years we've had a relationship with Europe which is stable? However, as a small business enterprise, the amount of money we're putting in to Europe doesn't justify the money we're taking out. As a small business enterprise in Wakefield, if that was the case with me, my shop would have been shut a long time ago, not 45 years later.
Yeah, sure.
You guys, you need to get your heads together, get conviction and cohesion across party. People need to get together. 40, 50,000 laws. There should have been 5,000 laws by now, reduced. A number of laws should have been reduced by now. We are not getting a clear message by you politicians. You need to be straight with us. We gave you a mandate. Mandate was out.
Let me go to the gentleman next to you.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of talk being done, but what about working people? I think we're overlooking them. What about people on zero-hour contracts? What about people visiting food banks? What about people suffering with lowered disablement benefits? What are they? They don't want to be paying into EU. They want that money. There was the illusion of NHS money going in when we come out. All that's been forgotten now. It's all about...
Are you saying you wanted the money that we pay into Europe to be
we should be looking
spent on other things?
We should be going down a socialist direction, which is, never mind paying into fat cats to run massive businesses at expense of people in Britain. You know, I'm an internationalist.
Yeah, but how does this relate to the Brexit talks?
There who looks back to days at British Empire.
But how do you relate that to the Brexit talks? I mean, that's a political view, fine.
Of course it is, yeah.
But what's that got to do with the Brexit process?
Because the Brexit process is all about giving money to Europe, isn't it? They should make a socialist plan to go in.
But that should be going to the NHS and everything else.
Because you've got to replace the EU.
There is another link to the Brexit process, which is the view the gentleman puts can be tested really substantially at the next general election. And if Jeremy Corbyn's view prevails, which I hope it doesn't actually, but if it does, then actually all these things that the Labour Party hasn't been able to do before, renationalising industry, state aid, regional policy, that can go ahead. So we will hopefully, if we're out by then, we will have a proper general election in 2022.
Let me just bring in two of our panellists who we haven't heard from yet. Jagjit Singh, you own a care home.
Yes.
What do you make of the situation 15 months on after you voted Brexit?
I think it's all about the details, and like the gentleman in the audience, it's all about, the way I see it is, we perceive ourselves to be a very rich country, but it doesn't, a lot of people in this population don't feel it. We live in an area in the north of England where if you want social care, £2.85 is what you get paid per hour for social care. You could have cancer, you could have high-end dementia, anything like that. All the government gives you is £2.85 to look after these people. We look at we're living in a world where continence pads are rationed. We're living in a place where elderly people over 65 can't get wheelchairs because they said they're denied them. We're living in a situation, we live in Wakefield here. In Wakefield, 3 care homes have closed. Why is that closing? Because we've lost 10,000 EU workers from the NHS. We were promised that the NHS...
Since the
yeah, and these are statistics. 1,794 doctors have left since Brexit. I'm not saying
so
the EU...
Are you regretting how you voted? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying staying in the EU is the answer, but what I'm saying is we should have had some dynamism. We were told that, oh yeah, we're going to basically come out of Europe, but we're going to open ourselves to the world. And what I'm saying is we were told that we were going to get 350 million for the NHS, we were going to get all this. What I'm seeing is the NHS, where the number of workers have massively gone down, the number of skilled people have massively gone down. Social care is suffering because NHS is now sucking that up. And in Wakefield alone, 3 care homes have closed. In the north of England, they're talking about 30% of the care homes closing in the next 3 to 4 years. We're looking at a situation, this is the reality.
So if you were asked the same question today, would you give the same answer?
If I was asked to say, well, what I would say is, I want a dynamic. I'm looking at the people that made promises. I look back at that Brexit debate and I feel a bit embarrassed about how ill-informed the population was when that debate happened. You know, if we go back and we look at YouTube videos of what people were saying and we look at it now, how much of that was accurate? When I grew up and you watched a politician on TV, if they made a U-turn, it was embarrassing. Now they make so many U-turns, it's like they're driving instructors. You know, you've got to really look at it.
Well, Daniel Hannan, you've got to answer that, haven't you?
Well, first of all, obviously, when we leave, we are going to have the extra money. How we spend it is going to be up to us. I mean, maybe people will vote for the socialist direction that the gentleman there wants. I hope not. But that's an argument that we're going to have.
How much money are we going to have? You're not going to repeat the 350 million a week, are you?
I mean, we will have... we're paying in 350 million a week gross, right? We get, yes, true, some of that is then spent in the UK.
Are you really saying we pay in?
Some of that is then spent in the UK.
We do not send a cheque for 350 million.
But it's not spent on... Well, sorry, that was a figure taken from... I mean, we can rerun the whole thing. That figure from the National Audit Office.
He's saying he felt misled over all these claims.
Can I expand on that?
The amount of money increase... Sorry, I just wanted to make one point. Every year, in real terms, the NHS is getting more money now. Right? Now, that's not to say that it has no problems, obviously, but that is a reality. And eventually, yes, we are going to get to the figures that we were talking about.
If you get a situation where you lost so many nurses, I believe that there's 40,000 vacancies in the NHS, then as a country, then we should be thinking, well, we're massively going to fund nurses. We're going to go to university, we're basically going to create our own generation of nurses. But what has actually happened, they've cut the bursaries.
But that is plainly not a Brexit.
The reality
is plainly not a Brexit issue, right? There are more
the reality is you need skilled labour for the services.
They don't think that our economy
is tanking. For the services of the country, you need skilled labour. Whether you create your own labour, where you get it from the rest of the world, whether you get it from Europe, you've got to have something. You can't just suddenly say to people, yeah, we're going to have nothing. What I'm saying is if you look at the people that led the Brexit vote, a lot of them collapsed. They basically self-destructed in the months after Brexit, whether it was in their political parties or what they were doing. What I'm saying is I believe that the bankers put this country in a bad situation. What I'm saying now is the politicians have not done any better. And it's the working man who basically has been honest, who's been working full-time jobs, who now has to decide, am I going to pay my mortgage, or am I going to pay my council tax, or am I going to feed my kids?
But I do,
they're basically having to suffer as a result.
I have to come back on the idea that it's all been a disaster, because right, more people are in work than ever before in British history. Exports are up, manufacturing is up, you know, the stock exchange is at a record high, growth is up. All of the things that we were told in the campaign, that there'd be a recession in 2016, that there'd be mass unemployment, that we'd all be taxed £4,000, that Scotland would leave the UK, that the Calais jungle would be moved to Kent, those things have not happened, right?
Yes. So the pound fell how much? 18%, 20%?
By not as much as the IMF said it should have done before the referendum. It was massively overvalued. Now,
so it wasn't as bad as people said.
Because we have a competitive currency, our exports are surging.
No, Samantha Harvey, next to you, is a businesswoman. You're the MD of a travel company.
That's right.
Are you as optimistic as he is?
Yes, very much so, because I have also a set of figures. First of all, welcome, Christian, a very warm Yorkshire welcome. I run a travel business in Wakefield, and we actually, since last year, has grown by about 15%. So also, just to let you know, the figures from ONS, the National Statistics Office, to say that this year, in July, we actually have the British outbound travellers has spent 4.4 billion, which is 15% up increase than last year, last July, in the same period. So if travel has not been hit or affected, then obviously we are we allowed to be more optimistic about our Brexit future.
All right, well, look, Jagjit took us to a crucial question that is part of the negotiations, and that is immigration. And to what extent some of the promises of the campaign are going to be delivered. Is freedom of movement going to stop or not after this period of negotiation. John Mann, how important is it that freedom of movement must end no matter what our situation?
It's the most important issue. And it's the most important issue. It's exactly the opposite reason that Tony Blair gives. Tony Blair, when he spoke a week or so back, said, oh, well, what we want is stop all movement apart from for jobs. It's actually the opposite. I'm not bothered who comes here as a tourist. I want people to come here as tourists, as free as they want. And I want to go abroad on my holidays sometimes. It's about jobs and work. It's the biggest issue, because what we've had for the last 10 years in particular is pay and conditions in this country hit. And that's the big one. That's the big one. And,
so it's an absolute red line, and that means we have to be out of a single market.
It's an absolute red line, and the government isn't preparing for exactly the point about care homes and NHS. What the government should be doing as part of Brexit now is training up loads of more nurses. It's exactly what they should be doing.
Can I bring it? Hang on, we've heard quite a lot from you. I want to bring in some other people. Ollie Khan, yes. You're from the curry houses.
Yes, I'm from the Bangladesh Caterers Association. We represent 12,000 curry houses. And we have been given misinformation when we have supported the Leave campaign. And one of the senior leaders from the Leave campaign, they have told us that if you support the Brexit, then you'll have more chance, because, you know, the curry house is facing a lot of staffing issue at the moment, a lot of staff shortage.
You can't bring in people from India and Bangladesh.
Yeah, absolutely. So they have said that if you come out of Brexit, then what we'll have more chance to get people from Commonwealth countries. And after the Brexit, we tried to contact with those leaders. They're actually ignoring us. They're not responding any of our letters or even our calls.
Patrick O'Flynn, it was Nigel Farage.
Something that is going to happen.
It was Nigel Farage who went round saying we will be letting in more people from Commonwealth countries after Brexit.
No, it wasn't actually. But the point is, we can have a non-racist, level playing field immigration policy. The British people need to work out what that looks like. Now, we've had a tendency over the past 15, 20 years towards immigration of high volume and low skill. And for a country like us, with our population density, our very generous public service offer that we all appreciate, and people on minimum wage not really paying much in tax, which is a consensus among politics, that doesn't make sense. I will be arguing at the next election we should change to a low migration but high skill migration.
Can we just be clear to this gentleman?
But it will be level playing field.
Because he thought more people from his country and his subcontinent were going to be allowed into Britain.
Experience,
do you think more people will be coming in from Bangladesh after Brexit?
No, I don't. But in my experience, people from particularly South Asian backgrounds, what really rankled them was not the level playing field, and that any European could come in irrespective of their attitudes or aptitudes.
I disagree. I think there will be more qualified curry chefs coming in because they're bringing a skill and they're coming to a job that's been advertised for them to fill. And by the way, I think that's about the most uncontroversial benefit of Brexit that I can name. Our curry is going to get better. How can you possibly argue that?
The thing is, how can I get this? If you think about the small curry houses, yeah, and did you see that what is the amount of wages they have to pay? They're going £35,000 to get a skilled chef from South Asia, whereas the average chef in this country pays about £25,000. So why this is £35,000 for a chef to get from South Asia? This is like something to get a chef for £35,000, selling your curry double the price, isn't it?
I'm on your side about bringing in more qualified chefs. I think you should concede in return that we could be doing more to train up people in this country to be curry chefs, right? It's in the long run.
I think there's a lot of assumption here of people who voted Brexit, because I think there's multiple reasons, and I don't think immigration was the main reason, like we've said previously. I think there was a fairness concept that I came across, we've all come across as politicians, where people thought that the migration from the European Union was unfair because they weren't following the same process that everyone else had to follow. They didn't have the same income levels. They had to apply before they got a visa to come into this country. They didn't have the same. They were entitled to benefits much earlier. So there was that factor, but there was multiple factors. And I think to assume and make assumptions that the public voted for one particular reason or two particular reasons is not the case. And we can't make that, because people voted to leave the European Union. They didn't have a tick list. We're going to leave the single market. We want to do this. There was none of that work that went on. All of it is now is just an assumption.
What about the gentleman over here on the end? I mean, how much of a red line is immigration for you?
To be fair, immigration doesn't really concern me too much. I didn't vote on them grounds. The only point I want to make is if the government was really serious about bringing down immigration, they could have done it from people from outside the EU anyway. There's been years where immigration from outside has been higher, so I don't get all this farce about immigration coming from certain parties.
So what's more important
ask about the trade as
What's
well?
more important? Just hold on. What's
important is the ability to control his own public services and stuff, like the Royal Mail, nationalising as like railways and bus networks and stuff like that, and spending more money on his NHS and things.
Lynn.
Yeah, just going back to the Commonwealth, one of my concerns was trading with the Commonwealth. Also, in terms of the common agricultural policy, what are we going to do about that? Because I know in terms of Tate and Lyle for sugar, they wanted Brexit to happen. And for me, it's a must that we still trade with Commonwealth countries, developing countries, because of things like sugar. As opposed to using sugar beet, we need to use raw cane sugar. So, like yourself, my thing is, you know, being able to trade with specifically countries like the Caribbean.
Yep. Well, I mean, on trade, I mean, the big question obviously on trade is, are we going to be in the single market or not after this? Or how are we going to get this free trade deal?
We need to leave.
Who here voted Brexit thinking we would stay in the single market? Yes.
But what does that look like?
I think the assumption is that we all voted to leave the European Union. We didn't vote to leave the single market. We didn't want to make the country poorer. And I think we don't know the impact. There's nothing changed.
That is what you used to say, Daniel Hannan, isn't it? You actually said on Channel 4 News.
Yes.
Nobody's talking about leaving the single market.
Well, and you will remember then the whole interview where I was saying we should do what the Swiss do, which is to have the ability to trade with the rest of the world while still having free trade with the EU.
And free movement.
And I still think the Swiss model is
free movement.
Well, I'm in favour of free movement of labour. I think we should take back control in the sense that you no longer have the right to come as an EU citizen justiciably. But having taken back control, personally, I think that we should allow people to come and work and study here.
Is that what you thought you were getting? That there would still be free movement of labour? Yes, gentlemen in the blue shirts.
Yeah, just on that point, that's not what we voted for. We didn't vote to stay in the single market. We didn't vote for the continuation of free movement. We voted for the right to take back control. And I think that's the one thing which we're all missing here is I don't care if it takes 1 year or 2 years to get there. I think 2 years is too long. We want to take back control. We want an immigration policy which we decide on. And I want it to be open and fair and more workers from around the world coming here.
That's the trouble you have, isn't it? That's what they think they voted for.
But we can now have that debate, right, as an independent country, and whatever we decide, we can now do. It's no longer going to be dictated to us by commissioners and judges that nobody can vote for. We will decide what immigration policy we have. We'll decide who comes here and what terms.
We did, in the referendum campaign, it was made crystal clear by Vote Leave, and by Michael Gove made a seminal speech on this, we would leave the single market. There was a very early interview where Boris Johnson was a little bit vague about it, but then all the Remainers jumped on board and Cameron Osborne said, leaving the EU means leaving the single market. Michael Gove made a set-piece speech and said yes, and explained the consequences. So I think leaving the single market absolutely essential.
But the single market is not a single thing. The single market is an accumulation of different responsibilities and different obligations, some of which I think are hugely in our interest. For example, the non-discrimination against products on grounds of origin, the competition rules. Some of them are not in our interest, and that's particularly the things that forbid us to sign our own trade deals, because you're right, we do now have the opportunity to re-engage with the Commonwealth and with the bits of the world that are growing. I think we can have a situation at the end of this process where, yes, we still have free trade with our 27 EU allies, but we can now re-engage with the 165 non-EU countries, which are, to a single approximation, going to be 100%
But that's because you're prepared to have freedom of movement, which the rest of them aren't.
Can I just add that we also will have a new opportunity from other countries, for example, with China, with Singapore, with Hong Kong.
Absolutely.
And one thing I want to say is one person flying from Manchester to Beijing through Hainan Airlines, through Manchester Airport, the spending from Chinese tourists is £620, opposed to our £27 of spending. So we have a lot more opportunity.
Let's get a couple of more views from the audience. Yes, lady in a second.
Leaving the free market is essential, surely. I mean, we can't trade with the rest of the world if we stay in the single market, and that was a very it was a very well yeah.
You mean you can't secure a free trade deal with the rest of the world?
Yeah, it's difficult, and that was a very important thing why people voted to leave the EU. So I'm sorry, no, it's right.
Gentleman on the back row there in the red tie, just put your hand up. Yeah.
Yes. The main reason I voted was for the sovereignty of this country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we stay in the single market, we still come under the jurisdiction of the European Court, in which case we're no longer a sovereign nation. We're sovereign. We should take our place back in the World Trade Organization, and then we can make our own trade deals.
I think that most people voted for the same reason as you, sir, but the Prime Minister has very explicitly ruled out still being under the jurisdiction of the European Court.
Yes. Well, I mean, we've already said that most people voted to leave because they wanted to return sovereignty to this country. But if we stay in the single market, are we surely not giving power to Europe to decide who we trade with and how we trade?
Can I just come to you two in the middle? I mean, because it feels like we've sort of crystallised something that began right at the beginning of the referendum campaign. Are you surprised by how divided you actually are, even though you're all on the same side? Daniel Hannan started out today saying, oh, we're all united. You're not really, are you?
Well, no, I think people of a UKIP persuasion and many millions of Brexit voters are very worried that the Remain team seems to be running the government. There's a key committee that decides these things of half a dozen people. 4 of them are Remainers: Theresa May, Damien Green, Amber Rudd and Philip Hammond.
You should have sorted this out in advance, shouldn't you, Daniel Hannan? That's the truth.
There's only 2 Brexiteers on that committee, and that's why Boris Johnson was right the other week to pop up and put that optimistic vision as one of the leading Brexiteers in the debate.
I'm afraid we are out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed for joining us. That's it for the debate on TV. But we will be carrying on Facebook Live and on YouTube for another 10 minutes, so join us there. Tonight was just part 1 of 2 Brexit debates. Next Thursday, we'll have a room full of Remain voters and a panel of Remain politicians discussing what they should do now. Accept Brexit as a reality or fight harder to stop it. Channel 4 News will be back at 7 tomorrow. In the meantime, from all of us here in Wakefield, good evening. Thanks very much indeed. But don't move, because we're going to carry on. We are going to carry on. Yeah, what are the questions? Standing on the back row. Hang on, are we back on yet? Right, OK. Well, I think we are still on Facebook and YouTube, so thank you for joining us here. Let's just pick up on that, where we didn't have time to finish on the TV, Daniel Hannan. I was putting to you, the truth is, there was vote leave, there was vote, leave EU. You were divided from the beginning. You're still divided now.
Inevitably, because the country was divided into 52-48. So obviously, within the Vote Leave coalition, you had people from the far left, you had people from the right, you had people in the middle, trade unionists, Tories. So the one thing that the referendum decided is that we were leaving, right? It was an instruction to the government, get us out. It wasn't a vote for a particular programme. I think that's inevitable in the nature of a referendum. I think, though, we should... I mean, all of us in this room voted leave. I think we should be honest and generous enough to accept that we didn't win a massive mandate, and that we should try and carry as many of the 48% with us as we can. We should try and do this in a cordial way, in a phased way, with the agreement of friends and allies around the world. We are going to get back our sovereignty. We're going to get back our independence. We're going to be a self-governing country again. Right, but frankly, next to that,
sorry, Danny, you've changed your tune an awful lot, right? We don't know that. You said a minute ago, trust Theresa May. She's promised this. That's part of the problem. We can't trust Theresa May because she's a weak negotiator. And you see, the 48%, I bet a lot of that 48% would be very delighted with the fact that when we've left, we can reverse nationalisation, we can reverse privatisation of the NHS, which we've not been able to do under EU law, that we could nationalise the railways. That'd be very popular. Now, I know Daniel won't agree with either of them, but there'll be quite a lot of Remainers who will agree with that.
Argument. And in a democracy, isn't that great?
The problem is we're not getting on with it. The problem is 4 years is too long. Why 4 years? Known as gentleman at the front said, we've had how many 50,000 laws. No, we don't, because the government, rightly on this case, is making all those laws They are British law, they're keeping them British law. And what the government's going to do, at some stage in the future, the Tory party will put forward the ones they want to get rid of. And people like me, if it's paid holidays, I'll be voting against them. Those all come in the Repeal Act, all of them. That's the only way it can be done. We're not negotiating 50,000 laws sensibly. We're not negotiating any of those laws. We're not negotiating. No, we're not. The negotiations are very simple and very straightforward. Do we have access? Do we have access into trade? And if we do, what do we pay for it in terms of policies such as immigration or in terms of money? That's the negotiation. Now, there's a separate negotiation over the Irish border because of the complexities there. They're the two big... The Irish one will be sorted. The trade one, it's not straightforward because the EU rules say if you're in with us, you can't have your own trade agreements, number one. And secondly, politically, they're saying you've got to keep free movement of labour. And I'm saying free movement of labour, that's not an acceptable price to pay. Thirdly, they're saying money. Well, frankly, the money bit will be sorted one way or other. People here might not be happy, the country might not be happy. The money bit will be sorted. But if the government comes back and says, oh, we've done a deal, and anyone from Europe can come and work and have a job, as Daniel said he wanted, in Britain, there'll be a lot of trouble.
I'll tell you what is going to be the big difference.
Because that's not what people expect.
I'll tell you what is going to be a huge difference. At the moment, you come as an EU national by right and you can claim all the same benefits as if you were a UK national. And the thing we're really talking about here is in-work benefits, tax credits and other in-work benefits that mean that if you come from Romania and you were previously on the average wage in Romania and you come onto the minimum wage here, you are better off. Now, once you take out the benefits, that's no longer true. And so there is going to be a sharp fall in numbers simply as a result of making that change.
Have we got the power to reduce the benefit system for these people who are coming now as well? It's not just the previous people who are settled here. You know, this country is built on immigration. You can't suddenly stop the migration of people from a European zone, which we've been dealing with for 45 years.
You can't suddenly stop it. But I think that if by making that change, we get more skilled people and fewer unskilled.
Let me just bring in this gentleman who's right behind me. I missed you during the TV programme because of that. What did you want to say?
Well, one thing that the panel seems to be avoiding at the moment, or not discussing, is the main thing we need at the moment is clarity. So the gentleman here has been talking about losing of thousands of workers. If the government or we can clarify what the process is going to be, like the gentleman was saying earlier on, with this week we're doing this. I mean, the financial services alone, half the trade is with Europe. So if we can get some clarity, I feel it would be a lot better.
Well, that's precisely what John is saying. There can't be any clarity because the government is weak.
That trade's not in the single market. That's goods. There is no free trade in services. It's in goods.
Not true.
I do this for a living. I import diesel into this country. This is all absolute nonsense what these politicians are saying. There are only two systems. There's ECMS, which is the system that the European Union uses, and there is CHIEF, which is the rest of the world. And you can switch any trade from any country in the world just by deciding which system it's on. All they need to make a decision of is when and what day are we doing this. We'll do the rest. They don't need to do any more.
So you think it could be done very quickly?
Instantly.
Gentleman next to you.
One of the things nobody's taken into account here is that 45 years of EU membership has seriously damaged our ability to govern ourselves. And people don't realise this. Just things like accredited economic operator status. Our companies only have it because the members
what
of
is
the
that?
EU. Well, it's what all companies use to export. And so you can do your paperwork online, so on and so forth. Now, if we set all the civil servants in this country on trying to get us our own accredited economic operator status, they're not going to do it next week or next Monday.
That's the real reason for that. You're right. The trade isn't the problem. The trade is not why we have to have a transition period. It's all these other things.
Gentleman with the blue shirt.
I just think it's really... when I don't know what date this is going to happen.
Exactly.
So I rang the customs and said to them, what date can I do this? Which country am I using? Am I using Germany? Am I going to use Canada? Which country am I going to make diesel in? You tell me. Right? It's going to end up here and it's going to be running in all your vehicles, but I need to know when. Just tell me which date. And the guy from the customs said, we've been doing this for 300 years. What's the problem? Just make a decision.
Gentleman in the blue shirt.
I think that's really true. I think it's a bit rich when the Labour Party calling the Tories confused and weak on the issue of Brexit. Because who knows what goes on in Jeremy Corbyn's mind from 1 week to the next on the issue of Brexit. What we want is clarity. If you put us in charge of the negotiations, televise it so everybody could see
exactly what the EU are saying to those negotiators and see the discussion. Then set 1 year and say, right, this is the deal. In 1 year, we leave. And let's hopefully negotiate a good deal.
Can you shed some light, John?
Want to
Do
be
you
in
know,
EU.
I mean, is Jeremy Corbyn really edging towards a position where Labour will support staying in the single market? Do you think that's the strategy?
Jeremy Corbyn was... Jeremy Corbyn... I always speak the truth. It doesn't always go down well, even with Jeremy. But Jeremy Corbyn has outlined the two key principles this week on Europe. The first is on free movement of labour. That Labour will not be in favour of free movement of labour. He's made that clear. Secondly, state aids, which is about the ability both to stop privatisation and to nationalise, but also critically to give government support to new industries that you're not allowed to do because of EU rules. Labour, if it was negotiated now, would have that at the core part of the negotiations that we can support British industry. But Labour...
74, 79, John. Inefficient industries.
No, but sadly, we're not in power. That's why the point about the Tory party is important. They're in power, and therefore it's them who are doing the negotiating.
The Labour position changes more than the stock market does. We don't even know what the Labour position is. The two outlined. How long has it taken Jeremy Corbyn to actually come out? We don't even know if he was... we don't even know how he voted, actually, in reality. No, when you...
He's been pretty clear.
Chris, I don't want to get it on a political... Can we just get one question in? John, this is the first time I'm going to agree with the Labour MP. The immigration is important. Now, I'm very concerned because this gentleman just mentioned diesel. This government has told us that in 20 years there will be no diesel in this country.
What's the question?
That will decimate the car industry and the engine industry by about 600,000 to 700,000 workers in this country alone when we move to electrical engines, because they're very easy to make. The combustion engine's gone. Diesel will be gone. That's the same in Germany car making, Spanish car. Where will this tens of millions of car workers be looking for work in the next 15 to 20 years as we move to the electrical green way? And I'm worried about that.
All right.
Because I do agree, John, we need more and more training.
Krishna?
Anyone want to comment on that?
If I could answer that, I'd be a millionaire, wouldn't I? If I knew what the next big thing was.
Can I just make a point?
But somebody's already working on it.
Krishna?
Subject, very briefly, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Okay. Basically, what I would like to see is, yeah, we put a lot of attention into this negotiation, but where is the attention about what is the impact of Brexit on this country at the moment and what we're doing about trading with the world? Surely we should have totally separate departments that are saying, look, we've lost this many doctors, we've lost this many nurses, so we need to go out with the rest of the world and say, look, come here. Because the doctors that have been trained in the NHS are going to Australia. They're going to Canada. You know, we're losing them because all our focus is on this negotiation.
We can now
and
do this.
The dynamism of basically trading with the world doesn't seem to be there.
We can now bring in, skilled surgeons, computer programmers, and indeed
But we're 13, 14 months since the
because
debate.
we need to fill the...
I'm going to bring this to an end. Thank you all very much indeed. And if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, bye-bye. We'll see you soon. We're going to do another of these next week with Remainers.